Bueno, soy artista y soy de Brasil, pero no voy a hablar portuñol. I'm going to present in English. The original text was written in English, so I hope that's okay. So as Bunny was saying, this work, Face as Infrastructure, it was a research report, actually, that I did when I was at Strelka Institute in Moscow in 2020. I did it together with three other people, Chiara de Leone, who was supposed to be here but couldn't, Piers Myers, and Anastasia Sinistia. And the bulk of the presentation comes... Should I take it off? I think it's better, right? Okay. So the bulk of the presentation comes from this research report. We did it together, but I also complemented and extended a few other points that are more interesting for me with my research as an artist. I'll have to do a little VJ here. Sorry. Okay, so as I said, this report outlines research cases about the face as infrastructure, or more specifically, when we say face as infrastructure, what we mean is the face as a central unit of value in a planetary technical system and cultural construct. Infrastructure, very briefly, just so we can have like a vocabulary for everyone, is this underlying foundation or units of systems that organizes facilities, installations, everything that is needed for a community or a city to work. Infrastructure can be both hard, like physical things, internet cables, sanitary systems, but also soft. Grammar, for example, is a kind of infrastructure. I don't know, like credit card systems, bank systems, things like that. So the face does more and more each day as the register of ownership, as entrance in schools, payment systems in meetings. We're now very used to seeing all of the faces in little squares in Zoom, and in cultural exchanges. It's hard to imagine today the economy without the face. So it means that it is a central register of geopolitical and also ecological narratives at a planetary scale. So here you're seeing that the face is expression, but also function. That's the main hypothesis of our work. So from politics to protests to pave your face to Zoom meetings, the face is the infrastructure of the global and cultural economy. But the face itself was always a mask, one that changes depending on the audience and the social space of interaction. As human culture enters a larger sphere of awareness, it comes to understand the space of its social interaction as linked to the planetary scale processes rendered immediately visible by the spread of COVID-19. The network of our lives, mediated by the face, is linked to the global infrastructure. So it's very important to say that when we did this work, it was in April 2020. So we're in the beginning of the pandemic and the COVID crisis. So the hypothesis of this report is that the face is an ongoing deep time design project. It is a project not because of its theological in nature, but because it is a calcification of repetition, desires, expressions, necessities, and whims. The desire for survival and the desire for freedom from the insufficiency of written and spoken language. During the past 6 million years, humans have optimized the hard and soft facial tissues for the maximum range of facial expressions over the ability to take punches. That means that over 6 million years, we have evolved from having hard bones or hard muscles to more soft muscles in order to be able to express very nuanced emotions. The face is the original genetic technology for becoming human, yet this process is inherently inhuman and biomechanical. So our faces are short, they are small and retracted beneath a large globular brain case. Biolinguistics say that genes are expressed through the environment and not independently of it. While the image of the face might vary between populations and generations, what remains is our ability to identify and recognize others, to communicate and to signal about 20 emotions bypassing or relaxing the muscles. The evolution went the way to provide more possibilities for non-verbal communication. So what we're interested here is the centrality of the face as a way of encoding alternative economy, social norms, supply chains, identities, and collective aesthetics. We see that the face can either filter things, but also support other things. And usually both things are ambiguous, they're ambivalent. Makeup, the bot example from yesterday, the work that we were seeing. So the face can be used to either bypass, for example, as we saw yesterday, censorship or content management, or actually to reinforce algorithmic feedback loops in the social networks that we've been using these days. The signaling aesthetics at the personal scale forms the basis of larger structures of value, meaning and order which are inflected in the infrastructures of society. The face to come will be a mesh of hallucinated collective features rather than a sum of individuated and self-interest agents. So we're very used to thinking face as a very personal space, and our content is that face is actually a collective enterprise. As we come to understand the space of our social interactions as linked to planetary scale processes, the networks of our lives, mediated by the face, become linked to global infrastructure. The face does more and more each day as the register of ownership, entrance in schools, payments, meetings, etc. In spatial context, faces are like a distributed cartography of attention, health, and emotions. This distributed map of the face carries immense value. A global machine vision network architectures aggregates data, a facial economy for buying and selling both attention and emotion on the global market. So here we have the face as actually the interface. The face as an interface for attention and emotional markets. So covering the face actually becomes a trigger. Changing it through surgery, filters, makeup are okay. We are getting used to and more used to that. But covering the face actually, with the COVID, we understood as actually a very strong trigger. Talking face-to-face is a form of soothing and getting more information from the other person. When I say that it's triggering, what I mean is that we could actually see how face masks divide in many countries' populations. So the divide was between an individual choice and collective protection. In Brazil especially, it became a signal of supporting Bolsonaro. So not only it was a vector of, the mask was not only a vector of protection of a collective environment, but also a signal of political tendencies, let's say. As said, the trigger for this text was the pandemic. One of COVID-19's unrequested insights has been the heightened perception of the flows of air and particles we push inside and outside ourselves. Outside of cells, sorry. Also, the order in which our hands touch surfaces, water soaps, and then our faces. We feel somewhat naked and fragile without a textile covering our airways. Seeing movies now and finding it strange that people are not wearing masks on them has become a very daily experience for me, because I'm so used to having this mask covering my face that when I see representations on screens of people not wearing them, I actually find it weird. We have discovered, in short, that the face is a vector of the horror. As the saga of COVID-19 wears on, Western cities go through waves of emotional responses. Wearing the mask itself threatens the sense of normalcy. The mask over the face is depersonalizing to such a degree that people seem willing to risk catching the virus to avoid wearing a mask. The response against wearing the mask is almost as volatile as the response to the virus itself. In February 2020, Western mask wearers were ridiculed for being fashionistas. nothing more than trained adopters met with anger and disdain. The bearers of unwanted news. By April 2020, it was clear that the widespread mask adoption was a critical part of flattening the curve. Now, 2 years later, the ethics and codes for masks still are confusing. Even with so many videos and tutorials of how to put it correctly, noses continues to peek out. Maybe the mask repulsion comes from the fact that masks reveal the intrinsic morbidity of our daily lives, the sudden fear that it may not be safe to breathe, and that our biological interfaces with the city may not properly protect us from a deadly and contagious virus or harmful pollutants, as the deadliness of the former is stronger correlated with the latter. Perhaps the mask is a memento mori for the West, a stark reminder of death for a culture which has mostly experienced exponential growth through graphs of GDP per capita, not number of excess deaths per million. Maybe it is the memory of the fragility associated of being in hospitals, or the not-so-distant traumas of world wars during which soldiers, children, and civilians wore gas masks. Or perhaps what is so unsettling is the prospect of obedience. Western civilization is built around ideas of personal freedom and individuality. These pillars are so central to Western culture that any attempts to diminish them are taken as existential threats. Masks do not feed the same fears as surveillance, but they somehow provoke the same reaction, a ferocious doubling down against authoritarian imposition. Perhaps the West was never scared of being surveilled as much as it was of being obedient. Face covering is a direct affront to self-expression. It points to a deeply ingrained and yet woefully outmoded pathology of the West, that self-expression is the essential dogma of its entire design ideology. What are the politics of the face? One of them, as I said, is signaling. So the mask became a signal vector for politics. But also in the context of a protest, a face as infrastructure is about losing the individuality. The function of the mask in a protest is not to have individual face, rather to engineer a shared face which corresponds to a collective ideal. In some cases, however, a single face becomes a symbol of a movement. We'll see shortly. The mask is a way of signaling sides, even though its primary function is to protect the protester from physical threats as tear gas, or political ones as identification. Masks can collectively allow people to do things that they wouldn't do, for example, in normal times, such as acts of violence or vandalism. Not only people, but also the police forces, of course. So this is a picture of a protest in São Paulo, and you can see that it's closely related to the Black Bloc movement. I'm not sure how many of you know that here, but it's very strong in São Paulo. Across the world, emergency laws has been drawn in order to stop people from covering their faces during protests. Most of these efforts produce very little results, leading to a bigger investment in creating better facial recognition tools, which now can recognize people's faces even with these masks on. 3D printed masks, face swapping apps, and deepfakes are going to be now a part of a new possible gradient of intersections of resisting and protesting facial recognition or using the face as a political weapon. So not much difference between these two face masks, but they underline very different sides of a political struggle. Again, here you can see the mask becoming a virtual signal, but also a very recognizable item of a political movement. The balaclavas used by the Pussy Riot organization, I'm not even sure how to call them, became quite famous because they were covering like this, but also using colors and using this kind of unorthodox masks, let's say. In that sense, a mask is a radical functionality, but also radical expressivity. That's one face to conquer all. We all know who this person is. It's quite funny to see her face turn into a mask. She has become a face of a movement. But the most pressing, I would say, question here is, which faces does this face are hiding us from? So this was a very talked about situation where the Ugandan climate activist Vanessa Nakate was cropped out of this picture. She's the only black person and the only person from the African continent in the picture, and she was cropped out for obvious reasons relating to her face and her racial ancestry. Did you know about this, or is it like, you know? Yeah. So on top of it was the picture that was circulated in the media with Greta, and then on the bottom is the actual picture. So a face is a technology that exceeds the individual. It gathers information and also emits information. What are the ways in which the face is operating and you operate as a shared infrastructure? How can it be thought as an interface for atmospheric, ecological, and epidemiological projects? Where will the face go? To say that the face is infrastructure is to introduce a contradiction in terms. Face stands for surface, the form, the shell, the image, the facade. Think of the human face, its soft tissues, face filters, a grimace, makeup, avatars. Infrastructure, on the other hand, is what lies below, often underground, sometimes intentionally concealed, hiding in the background or in plain sight. Think of a transatlantic internet cables, the arrangement of bones in our skulls, the QWERTY keyboard, grammar, train tracks, municipal water cables, and governmental bodies. One could say that infrastructure is the back end, while the face is the front end. But framing the face as infrastructure shows, for instance, the instance where the border between the front end and the back end, or expression and function, is blurred. In other words, it foregrounds infrastructure while showing how the human face, despite its expressivity and individual functions, has always been a technology that exceeds the individual. In Are We Human?, Mark Wigley and Beatriz Colomina survey the archaeology of humanity, pointing out how humans have always been in coevolution with the objects and environments that they have designed, hence expanding the notion of what is human. Building from this, we identify the ways that the face is operationalized by non-human systems, blending and confusing the front end and back end. In this space lies the possibility for coevolution, the face being the side condition for planetary scale design. The face is a combination of senses beyond vision, which usually is our most allegorized organ. We now have a lot of wearable computing, a domain for consumer of electronics, but it's embryonic at best. We have smartwatches, VR glasses, and sensors that monitor our heartbeat. But the cyborgian face is not the most interesting thing. Already there are many reports on how bionic eyes or other facial apparatus suffer from software and hardware obsolescence. It is not the assemblage of technology onto the face that matters. It is its distributed features. So not only the face senses, but is also always connected to sensors. As Benjamin Bratton says, we are also the skin of what we wear. The garment being cut and sewn soon is not only for us to wear. The city also wears us. We are not the only ones absorbing inputs from all the faces around us. The city is as well. It functions, again, as Bratton says, a distributed body which includes not only automotive sensors, but also digital component sensors, flow sensors, humidity sensors, position sensors, rate and inertial sensors, temperature sensors, relative motion sensors, visible light sensors, and recording cameras, etc. So the face is already connected to city systems. There is an increased integration of personal data and cashless transactions into payment systems, which are based less on owning a value title and more about being a value title. Alipay, it's a Chinese company, has already started doing the Smile to Pay software, where you can just smile at the machine at KFC, and then you pay your food. You can see how this idea of coming from a value title and being a value title can easily be related to a social credit system. In the sci-fi series Black Mirror episode, as the character episode about social credit, as the character's social credit decreases, the more disheveled she gets, and her face expressions, the more desperate. The process of selecting faces for increased attractiveness and smoothness has resulted in selection for decreased facial bone size called gracilization, from the French gracile. It is possible to say that we live in times of accelerated gracilization. As our brain cases get bigger, our faces get smoother and ever more gracile and infant-looking. As the artificiality of the face becomes more apparent with plastic surgery and Botox, as well as face filters and deepfakes, its intricacy with its surroundings and feedback process that design it also become more apparent. So Botox has been deeply woven now in everywhere and every face, and it has deep impacts on the fabric of human social life. So as bizarre as it sounds, people with Botox tend to make more mistakes when interpreting emotions of others. According to the facial feedback hypothesis, the face participates in a natural mirroring process. Not only does convey emotion to others, but the face also mimics the expression of others. Individuals feel empathy not only by reading the face of others, but by matching expressions with them. The facial feedback hypothesis is also saying that this is leading to a kind of spectrum of Botox autism, where people who have a lot of Botox or children, for example, who are exposed to a lot of people with Botox, don't have the full range of nuanced expressions and emotions that the face can convey. This expressive distance was highlighted when Melania Trump addressed the nation about COVID-19. To many across the internet, the video appeared as a deepfake generated by facial algorithms. The popular hashtag #FakeMelania highlighted the conflation of both physical and digital depersonalizations of the face. The unrealness of her face is real, but instead of algorithms, it's just the Botox. The other face, on the other hand, is not real. It's generated by the NVIDIA AI company. Pareidolia is a perceptual bias that indicates recognizing patterns, including human faces, in animate objects. How many of us have seen a face in the clouds or in the doorway? Pareidolia is rooted in the evolutionary history of humankind, back in times when telling a human from a bear was indispensable for survival. Nevertheless, our ability to see faces in patterns is strongly correlated to our desire to make sense of the world. As soon as we hallucinate a human face in an inorganic matter, our brain can treat it as human, and therefore as something that we can understand and relate to. Pareidolia underlines the numerous religious apparitions, visions, representations, such as the images of deities in stones. Ultimately, anthropomorphizing everything around us also leads to the idea that Earth is some sort of human entity related, Mother Nature, Gaia. The Voight-Kampff test, this is actually an age test for the crowd. The Voight-Kampff test was a test used in 2019 by the LAPD's Blade Runners to assist in determining whether or not an individual was a replicant. A replicant was a cyborg, for those who didn't watch the film. The test measured bodily functions such as respiration, heart rate, blushing, and pupillary dilatation in response to emotionally provocative questions. It typically took 20 to 30 cross-reference questions to detect a replicant. But what is an artificial face or expression after all? Mimicry is a strategy for facilitating affiliation, a sort of social glue. Mimicry have evolved to serve a social function by fostering relationships. It is actually based on neurons called mirror neurons. People often automatically or unconsciously mimic the behavior of their interaction partners, as seeing someone behave in a particular way activates a behavioral representation, causing the perceiver to adopt the exhibited behavior. Humans have a fundamental need to belong and affiliate. When two interaction partners share embodied state, they are likely to activate the same cognitions and affective states. This shared mental state creates in both the mimicker and the perceiver enhanced feelings of empathy and rapport. There is also evidence to suggest that the deliberate mimicry of another person's no-verbal behavior can benefit social interaction. So body language plus face expressions equals mimicry success. You can use discrete mimicry as a way to connect with someone you're trying to influence. Whether you realize it or not, humans are hardwired to imitate one another and react to being imitated. Studies found that individuals who subtly mimic their opponent were 5 times more likely to get what they wanted in negotiations than people who didn't. Consider adjusting your own facial expressions and voice tone to mimic those when you go to a job interview. This idea of mimicry got me wondering for other signs of extended positive feedback in culture. Not only the repetition, familiar in social situations, but also in culture as general. And that appearing as a closed loop of nostalgia. The past 10 years gave rise to a wave of nostalgia of pop culture favorite characters. While yet another actor impersonates the face of Batman now in the movies, 3 of Spider-Man's franchise actors actually met up in his most recent movie. We are seeing how this is evolving to a constant soothing feedback of familiar faces. And if we once needed people and actors for video work, now we have companies like Synthesia, who promises, say goodbye to cameras, microphones, and actors. For a computer-generated artificial intelligence, you can have David Beckham or Messi speaking 9 languages and sending messages to your friends. You can marketize a famous face and also exploit inexistent faces.
Hey there. I'm Mia and I can actually speak more than 50 languages here on Synthesia. For example, this is my default English voice. You can create an account now and start creating this kind of videos in 5 minutes.
Hey there. I'm Will, and I can actually speak more than 50 languages here on Synthesia. For example, this is my default English voice. You can create an account now and start creating this kind of videos in 5 minutes.
In the website, it actually says that the process itself is so advanced, you can tell your actor is not a native speaker. These are the people. So now we can model human voices, faces, and maybe emotions. And what is a face that people will respond to? Systems of classifications are created by very few people, and is looking for symmetry with these new face apps, most beautiful faces, and most beautiful faces with symmetry and face apps. Is actually interpreting evolution all wrong. The homogenization of the face and its classification serves no purpose other than maintain current systems of power. The results can be uncanny. Kate Crawford, who is a scholar on AI, mentions an example where analyzing video microexpressions, analyzing face and voice of top performers in job interviews are actually a way that people are hiring now. You can hire people that look, express, and sound like the people who are already in the top position. This means that we are creating a system that decides how opportunity is distributed and how opportunity and employment is distributed based on how data and faciality are relating. Platform conditioning always existed, but now is growing in exponential rates. So who are we looking at? The idea that we are looking at ourselves when looking at artificial intelligence-generated videos resonates with the theological idea that God made us in his image. In trying to explore communication expressions, why duplicate our own faciality? Why not explore the expression and communications further? Faciality becomes a colonial enterprise when projects the particular into the universal. The idea of the other has always been historically used for violent purposes, despite the other having the same bioevolutionary features, up to 2 functioning eyes, 1 nose, 1 mouth, muscles. However, in a faciality regime of homogenization and positive feedback loops, the other's features are always monstrosity and estrangement, and this will still be a primary excuse to support violence. As again Crawford says, artificial intelligence is neither artificial or intelligence. It's deeply embodied and material. It's infrastructural. The artificial face then becomes the site of alterity and future narratives. It also becomes the site for temporal narratives with predictions and profiling techniques which existed long before recognition software, but are nonetheless increased by them. I always think about how in Minority Report, the profiled person was Tom Cruise, a white male from the United States. It's very ironic. We should think on how the face, artificial, synthetic, can turn this the other way around. How we can make it not a site for colonial enterprises and homogenization, but actually of monstrosity and difference. Thank you.
Thank you, Luiza.